They see it, not the version of it you explain to people when they ask why things didn't work out with someone. Not the diplomatic, slightly edited, socially acceptable version where you talk about incompatibility or timing or wanting different things. The real version, the one underneath all the explanations, the one you've maybe only articulated to yourself in the quietest moments, when you're being fully honest about what you actually need versus what you've been offered. This person sees that version. And what I keep finding when I sit with this energy is something I wasn't quite expecting. Because usually when we talk about being seen about someone, understanding you, there's a warmth to it, an ease, a quality of finally exhaling. And that's here, but there's something else alongside it that I want to describe carefully. A slight discomfort, the specific discomfort of being understood by someone you maybe underestimated, of having someone younger, someone you might have assumed would have less insight into the complexity of who you are, look at you and articulate something about yourself that people twice their age never managed to access. That's what's happening. And it's unsettling in the best possible way. Let me go back to the not settling, because I want to describe what that has actually looked like in your life, not the story you tell, the real texture of it. There have been people, good people, some of them, people who wanted to be chosen, who offered things, stability, affection, consistency, the general shape of what a relationship is supposed to be. And you looked at those offerings and felt something that isn't easy to describe without sounding unreasonable. A knowing that it wasn't quite right, not a dramatic wrongness, not an obvious flaw, more like you'd be in the middle of something with someone, something that should have felt like enough, and some part of you would go very quiet, not in the peaceful way, in the specific, slightly sad way of someone who is looking at a life that doesn't quite fit and trying to decide whether fit is something you learn or something you find. And people had opinions about that. Some gentle, some less so. The ones who suggested you were too picky, too idealistic, that you had standards calibrated to something that didn't exist, that you needed to be more realistic about what was available, that the version of connection you were holding out for was a fantasy constructed from some internal blueprint that real humans couldn't actually match. And you listened to those opinions, took them seriously, tried genuinely to examine whether they were right, ran the honest internal audit, because you always run the honest internal audit, and came back each time to the same conclusion. No, it's not that the standard is too high. It's that the right person hasn't arrived yet. And you held that conclusion quietly, without making it a declaration, without the performance of someone certain of their own discernment, just held it in the face of the noise, in the face of the pressure, in the face of the moments where holding it felt lonely rather than principled. Hold on. Because I keep getting something about this younger person specifically that I want to try to capture before I go further. They didn't arrive with a theory about you. That's the thing. They didn't come to you already having constructed a framework for who you are and what you need. They came, and I want to describe this precisely, they came with presence, with a quality of actual attention, of being interested in who you specifically are, rather than in the idea of being with someone like you. And in that quality of attention, in the specific way they listen, the questions they ask, the things they notice and the things they don't, they've assembled something, a picture of you, a real one, not built from your explanations or your presentations of self, built from watching you from paying attention to the gap between what you say and what you actually feel, from noticing what lights something in you and what leaves you slightly flat, from the particular things you do when you're fully yourself versus the things you do when you're managing how you're received. They've been studying you without making it a project. And what they've assembled, this picture of who you actually are, includes the answer to the question that other people kept getting wrong. Why you couldn't settle. Let me describe what they understand about it. The version they see. It's not about perfection. They know that. They know you're not holding out for someone flawless. They know your standards aren't built from naivety or from the kind of romantic idealism that hasn't been tested by actual experience. They know, and this is the part that surprised me when I found it, they know that you've been hurt, that the not settling wasn't the choice of someone who has been protected from disappointment. It was the choice of someone who knows exactly what disappointment feels like and has decided with full information that the wrong person is lonelier than being alone. They understand that, and they don't find it intimidating. That's what I keep coming back to. Where other people encountered your discernment and felt evaluated by it, felt the pressure of your perception as something they had to perform for this person, encounters it and feels something different. Understood? Like your discernment is a language they happen to speak. Like the same quality that made others feel scrutinized makes them feel recognized. And that specific inversion is part of what makes this different. There's something about the age dynamic that I want to address directly because I think it's sitting somewhere in this reading and I don't want to go around it. You had assumptions, maybe not conscious ones, maybe not assumptions you would have articulated if asked, but somewhere in the way you initially encountered this person, there was a category they got placed in. Younger, less experienced, interesting perhaps, engaging certainly, but not necessarily someone whose understanding of your interior landscape would go as deep as it has. And they've been quietly, consistently dismantling that assumption, not through argument, through demonstration, through saying things that land, through noticing things you didn't expect to be noticed, through responding to the complicated parts of you, the parts that other people sometimes find exhausting or too much or too specific, with a recognition that doesn't require you to simplify. And each time that happens, each time they access something about you that you thought required more shared context to reach, something shifts slightly. Some adjustment happens in how you're holding this, in what you think it is, which brings its own complications because recategorizing something that was placed in a particular box requires acknowledging that the box was wrong. And acknowledging the box was wrong means confronting the assumptions that created the box. And that confrontation is its own kind of vulnerable. Actually, wait, there's something I want to go deeper on here because the not settling and this person are connected in a way that I haven't fully articulated yet and I want to try. You couldn't settle because what you were looking for, what you were holding out for, without necessarily being able to name it, was someone whose intelligence operated at a specific frequency. Not academic intelligence necessarily, not the intelligence of someone who knows many things, something more specific than that, the intelligence of someone who understands nuance, who can hold complexity without needing to resolve it into something simpler, who can be in the middle of a situation that doesn't have a clean answer and stay there, genuinely stay there, without rushing toward premature resolution. That kind of intelligence doesn't correlate to age. And somewhere in you, you knew that. Even if the knowing was buried under the assumptions, this person has it, not because they're extraordinary in some general sense, because this specific quality, this tolerance for complexity, this comfort with nuance, is native to who they are, not learned, not performed, just present. The way certain things are simply present in certain people, and encountering that quality in someone who surprised you with it, that's the disorientation you've been feeling. The pleasant kind. There's an image I keep seeing. You've been walking through a space looking for something. Not frantically, you gave up frantic a long time ago, more like a sustained, patient looking. And you've developed, through the duration of the looking, a very specific picture in your mind of what you're looking for, where it might be, what direction to face when you think about finding it. And then it appears somewhere you weren't facing. Not behind you, not in an ironic, it was there all along way, just at an angle you hadn't accounted for, in a direction your search pattern hadn't included. And your first response isn't recognition, it's confusion. The specific confusion of finding something in the wrong place. And then the adjustment, the slow recalibration of your own search pattern in light of where the thing actually turned out to be. That's where you are with this person. In the adjustment, the more I sit with this, the more I keep finding something about what this person has done to your self-understanding. And I want to name it because I think it's the most significant thing about this connection. They've confirmed something you weren't sure you were allowed to believe. That your perception of yourself was accurate. That the thing you needed, the specific quality of connection you were waiting for, was real, was possible. Wasn't a construction of your imagination or an over-calibrated standard or a defense mechanism dressed as discernment. It was real, and now it's here in a form you didn't predict, through a person who arrived with qualities you weren't necessarily watching for, but here, undeniably, uncomfortably, beautifully here. And the uncomfortable part, and there is an uncomfortable part, is that receiving that confirmation requires updating the story you've been telling yourself about your own situation. The version where you're still waiting, still holding out, still in the suspended state of someone whose person hasn't arrived yet. That story needs revision because they're here, and they've been here long enough that continuing to narrate yourself as waiting is starting to feel less like protection and more like resistance. I want to talk about what the resistance is actually about, because I don't think it's about them. I think you know on some level that this person is real, that what they offer is real, that the connection is real. The resistance is about you, about what it means to stop waiting, about what it means to actually choose someone, to let this be the thing, to move from the theoretical version of what you were holding out for into the concrete, specific, imperfect, actual version of it that is standing in front of you. Because the theoretical version was safe, it couldn't disappoint you, couldn't fail to understand you at a critical moment, couldn't be human in the ways that humans inevitably are when you actually let them close. This person is human, younger, and therefore possibly carrying things they haven't yet had the life experience to fully understand about themselves, not lacking genuinely impressive in the ways we've been describing, but human, with their own interior complexity, their own areas where growth is still happening. And choosing them means choosing something real rather than something ideal. Virgo knows what real costs. And Virgo also knows, in the honest place, underneath the protection that real is the only thing worth having. There's something about what this person sees in you specifically that I want to name before we go any further. They see why you're worth waiting for. And I don't mean that sentimentally. I mean they have a specific, articulated, even if never verbalized, understanding of what you bring, of the particular qualities that make being with you something that requires someone to show up at a certain level, of why the people who couldn't meet that level couldn't actually have held you properly, even if they'd managed to keep you. They don't see your standards as a barrier. They see them as a description of what this requires. And they're not daunted by the description. That's what makes this different from everything before. Not that they're perfect, not that they have it all figured out, but that they looked at the full picture of what you are, the complexity, the depth, the specific quality of what you need, and moved toward it rather than away. Moved toward you, not the simplified version, the real one. The last thing, you couldn't settle because settling would have been a lie. A lie told to another person pretending to be more present than you were, more arrived than you felt, and a lie told to yourself pretending that this was enough when the quiet part of you knew it wasn't. You're not built for that kind of lying. Your system rejects it, has always rejected it, even when rejection was costly, even when it would have been easier to stay, even when the people around you couldn't understand why you kept walking away from things that looked adequate from the outside. They looked adequate from the outside. They weren't adequate from the inside. And inside is the only place that matters for someone like you. This person, this younger person who surprised you, who arrived at an angle you weren't watching, who understood something about you that took other people years to even partially grasp, and who got there in a fraction of the time, not because they're exceptional in some abstract sense, but because they were paying the specific kind of attention that you've always needed someone to pay. They're not adequate. They're actual, and actual, genuinely, specifically, uncomplicatedly actual is what you've been waiting for. Let yourself know it. Let yourself stop waiting and start being here in this with them. You earned the right to stop holding out the moment what you were holding out for finally arrived. It arrived. If something in this resonated, if a moment touched, something you've been quietly holding, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me what landed. Even just a few words, it means more than you know.